The desert highway shimmered like a mirage of broken promises, stretching endlessly through the barren landscape where even the vultures thought twice before circling. Miguel Hernandez tightened his grip on the steering wheel of his 18-wheeler, the only sound in the cab being the rhythmic clicking of the mile markers and the low hum of tires. Against asphalt, both interrupted by the sudden appearance of two black SUVs materializing from nowhere, boxing him in with military precision. Miguel had crossed this border route 17 times before, each journey etched into his memory like the wrinkles around his eyes weathered, reminders of 23 years on the road, but he had never seen vehicles move with such coordinated intent, as if they were predators who had rehearsed the takedown of larger prey. The midday sun caught the glint of something metallic through the tinted windows of the lead vehicle, and Miguel's mouth went dry as desert dust as he instinctively eased his foot off the accelerator, his calloused hand sliding beneath the seat. Where the cold metal of his insurance policy weighted time seemed to slow as the SUVs tightened their formation, leaving no room for error or escape on the narrow stretch of highway that cut through no man's land, a section notorious among truckers for its lack of cell service and the mysterious disappearances that were spoken about in hushed tones at rest stops. Miguel's eyes darted to the family photo taped to his dashboard, his wife Maria, their daughter Lucia in her graduation cap, and little Carlos giving the camera a toothy grin, a reminder of everything waiting for him back home, everything worth fighting for. The lead SUV's window rolled down with mechanical precision, revealing a face hidden behind mirrored sunglasses, the man's expression as unreadable as it was dangerous. His arm extended outward, finger pointing authoritatively to the gravel shoulder ahead, a silent command that brooked no argument. Miguel's thoughts raced faster than his heart, calculating distances, angles, options, each one more desperate. Then the last dot, as the gap between the vehicles narrowed, Miguel could make out the details now, the tactical vests, the communication devices, the unmistakable outline of automatic weapons, all the hallmarks of cartel enforcers who treated the border region as their personal kingdom. He had heard stories from fellow truckers who had encountered these men, stories that never ended well, tales whispered like ghost stories to warn others away from routes that belonged to the shadows. Miguel's hand trembled slightly as he reached for the CB radio, knowing it was useless this far out, but driven by instinct and the desperate need to leave some record, some final message. "Breaker 19, he said into the dead air, his voice steadier than he felt. "This is Lone Wolf on Highway 16. I've got company of the unwanted kind." Only static answered him back, confirming what he already knew: he was completely alone. 3 days earlier, Miguel had stood in his driveway at dawn, performing the same ritual he had completed before every long haul for the past 2 decades. He circled his truck, a meticulously maintained Peterbilt 389 he had affectionately named La Reina, checking tire pressure, inspecting brake lines, and testing every light. The sun was just beginning to paint the Tucson sky in shades of amber and pink, the quiet neighborhood still draped in the remnants of night. "You checking that same bolt again?" Maria's voice carried from the porch, warm and familiar as she approached. With 2 steaming mugs of coffee, Miguel accepted the coffee with a grateful nod. "This old girl needs attention," he said, patting the chrome fender. "Like all the important ladies in my life." He winked at his wife of 22 years, whose eyes still crinkled at his tired jokes. Maria wrapped her cardigan tighter against the morning chill. 4 days this time? If the weather holds and the border crossing doesn't back up. 5 at most. Miguel took a sip of the coffee, letting the familiar ritual calm his nerves. Every departure was the same: the unspoken worries, the practiced casualness, the coffee they shared before the sun fully rose. "Lucia called last night after you went to bed. She aced her nursing exam. Pride bloomed across Miguel's weathered face, just like her mama. And just as stubborn as her papa, Maria added, her smile tinged with worry. She asked about the route you're taking. Miguel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. What did you tell her? That it's the same as always. But Miguel... She hesitated, setting her mug on the truck's running board. The news said there was another disappearance last week. A trucker on Highway 16. Jack Reeves, Miguel nodded solemnly. Known him for 12 years. Good man. They're saying it was the cartel. Miguel's eyes met hers, and in them was a hardness that rarely surfaced at home, a remnant of the man he had been before, in another life with another name. They say a lot of things, Maria. Inside the house, the lights flicked on in Carlos's bedroom. Their 10-year-old son would be rummaging for his soccer gear, already thinking about the weekend game Miguel would miss. I've taken this route 17 times, Miguel said, his voice softening. The hospitals in El Paso need these supplies. St. Luke's especially. They're short on everything since the budget cuts. Maria touched his arm, her fingers tracing the faded tattoo just visible beneath. His sleeve, the Marine Corps' emblem he had earned a lifetime ago. You're not responsible for saving everyone, Miguel. He covered her hand with his. Just my family. And I do that by doing my job. The front door opened, and Carlos burst out, his hair uncombed and soccer ball tucked under one arm. Dad, you haven't left yet. The boy's face lit up with relief, as though each time he feared his father might leave without goodbye. Miguel knelt down, his knees protesting after years of climbing in and out of truck cabs. Would I leave without seeing my champion? He ruffled Carlos's hair. Got your lucky shot ready for Saturday? Carlos nodded eagerly, dropping the ball to demonstrate a complicated footwork pattern. Coach says if I score, I might make starting lineup next week. Record it for me, Miguel said, his voice thick with the familiar guilt of missed milestones. I want to see every second. After Carlos retreated inside for breakfast, Maria handed Miguel his lunch cooler. Promise me something, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The usual routes. No detours, no favors, no heroes. Miguel nodded, a solemn vow between them. What remained unspoken hung in the air, the knowledge that Miguel had not always been just a trucker, that before his life in Tucson, he had been someone whose skills were precisely the kind that might be needed if the stories about Highway 16 were true. 2 hours into his journey, Miguel stopped at the Saguaro Rest Haven, a truck stop that served as an unofficial information exchange for drivers crossing the border regions. The sprawling complex of fuel pumps, diner, and small motel had become a sanctuary of sorts, a place where the unwritten rules of the road were passed from veteran to newcomer. Inside the diner, the air was thick with the smell of coffee, bacon, and the particular mix of diesel and dust that seemed to permeate everything in this part of Arizona. Miguel slid into his usual booth by the window, nodding at familiar faces. The usual, Miguel? Connie, the waitress who had been serving truckers here since before Miguel got his commercial license, didn't wait for an answer before pouring coffee into his mug. Thanks, Connie. Any word on Jack? Miguel asked, his voice low. Connie's perpetual. Smile faltered. Nothing good. His rig turned up empty outside Nogales. No sign of him or the cargo. She leaned closer. State police are calling it another hijacking. But you know how it is. They don't send resources for a missing trucker like they would for some politician's daughter. Miguel nodded grimly. It was the third disappearance in 2 months, all following a similar pattern. Experienced drivers, valuable but not extraordinary cargo, routes that skirted the more remote stretches of the border. You heading east? She asked, already knowing the answer. Medical supplies for El Paso, the usual run. Connie's eyes darted to the door as it opened. admitting a blast of hot air, and a man Miguel recognized instantly, Dave Paxton, a Border Patrol agent who frequented the diner during his off hours. The agent caught Miguel's eye and made his way over. "Hernandez," Dave nodded, sliding into the booth without invitation. "Thought you might be here." Miguel raised an eyebrow. "Something tells me this isn't a social call." Dave waited until Connie had retreated to the counter before speaking. "You filed your route plan for this run? Highway 16 through the reservation?" "Same as always." "Why?" Dave's voice dropped to a murmur. "We're hearing chatter. Cartel's got a new operation running through that corridor, taking drivers, using the rigs for moving product." Miguel's face remained impassive, years of military discipline ensuring that his expression betrayed nothing of the ice forming in his stomach. "Sounds like something for the Border Patrol to handle. We're stretched thin, you know that? And these guys—" Dave shook his head. "They're not the usual operators, more sophisticated. Ex-military, some of them. Colombian training." The implication hung between them. Dave was one of the few people who knew about Miguel's past, not the full story, but enough to understand that Miguel wasn't just another trucker. "I appreciate the heads up," Miguel said finally, "but I've got deliveries that can't wait. Hospitals are counting on these supplies." Dave studied him for a long moment. "There are other routes, longer routes. Means those supplies arrive a day late. Means someone doesn't get medication they need." Miguel sipped his coffee. "Besides, I'm just a trucker these days. Nothing special about my rig that would interest anyone. It's not the rig they're after, Miguel. It's the drivers who know the back roads, who have the contacts to move across the border without questions. Drivers like you." Before Miguel could respond, his phone buzzed with a text message. It was from St. Luke's Hospital administrator. "Critically low on supplies. Any chance of earlier arrival? Patients waiting." Miguel showed the message to Dave, whose shoulders slumped in resignation. "Just watch your back," Dave said, sliding out of the booth. "And maybe dust off some of those old skills of yours, just in case." As Dave left, Miguel stared out at La Reina in the parking lot, sunlight gleaming off her chrome stacks. 23 years on the road, and he had developed an intuition about runs, which ones would be smooth sailing, which ones might bring trouble. This one had been setting off warning bells since he accepted it, but he had pushed those feelings aside. Now, as he paid his bill and headed back to his truck, Miguel allowed himself to acknowledge the weight in his gut. He unlocked the cab and climbed inside, his hand automatically reaching beneath the seat to confirm his insurance policy was still there. A modified Beretta N9, the same model he had carried during his service, with 2 full magazines. A precaution he had never needed to use on a run, but had never been willing to drive without Dot as Miguel pulled out of the rest stop and back onto the highway. He glanced at the family photo on his dashboard. He had made a promise to Maria No Heroes, but he had made other promises too, to his children, to provide and protect, to the hospitals counting on his delivery, and long ago, to his country and to himself. Highway 16 stretched before him, ribbon of asphalt cutting through the desert. Somewhere along that road, danger might be waiting, but so were people who needed what he carried. Miguel adjusted his sunglasses and pressed down on the accelerator, La Reina's engine responding with a deep, powerful rumble. Just another run, he told himself, even as his mind began cataloging everything he knew about the territory ahead, exits and alternate routes, potential defensive positions, old habits from another life awakening after years of dormancy. Just get the job done and get home. The desert enveloped him, vast and indifferent, as the miles began to accumulate beneath La Reina's wheels. The sun climbed higher, the radio crackled with chatter from other truckers, and Miguel Hernandez once. Marine Staff Sergeant Miguel Hernandez drove steadily toward whatever awaited him on Highway 16. The border checkpoint loomed ahead, a cluster of gray buildings and floodlights that seemed to waver in the heat like a mirage. Miguel slowed La Reina to the required crawl, joining the line of commercial vehicles waiting for inspection. He had crossed here dozens of times before, enough to recognize the faces of most guards, enough to know their routines and quirks. But today, something felt off. Miguel rolled down his window as he approached the inspection point. The blast of air, conditioning from inside the booth, mixing with the desert heat. The guard who stepped forward was unfamiliar young, with a military haircut and eyes that moved too quickly, assessing everything with suspicious efficiency. "License and manifest," the guard said, his tone flat. Miguel handed over his documents, keeping his expression neutral. "Medical supplies for El Paso hospitals. Time sensitive." The guard barely glanced at the paperwork before passing it to a colleague in the booth. Another new face. "Pull forward to secondary inspection." "Secondary? Is there a problem?" Miguel kept his voice level, though his pulse quickened. Secondary inspection meant delays, sometimes hours. It meant missed delivery windows, medications that wouldn't reach patients on time. Just procedure today. The guard's face remained expressionless as he motioned Miguel forward. At the secondary inspection area, Miguel was instructed to exit the vehicle while they examined his cargo. He stood in the shade of a concrete overhang, watching as 3 guards opened the trailer and began methodically checking the sealed containers of medical supplies. One of them held a handheld scanner, moving it over each box with practiced precision. "First time I've seen that scanner," Miguel commented to an older guard he recognized, Martinez, who had been working this crossing for at least 5 years. Martinez shrugged. New protocols. Cartels getting creative with their smuggling. Hiding things inside legitimate shipments. Miguel nodded, as though this were simply an inconvenience rather than a concerning development. "Anything I should know about the route ahead?" "Heard there's been some trouble." Martinez's eyes flickered briefly to his colleagues before returning to Miguel. "Stick to the main roads. Don't stop unless you have to." Before Miguel could press further, the lead inspector approached with his paperwork. "You're clear to proceed, Mr. Hernandez. Sorry for the delay." As Miguel climbed back into his truck, he noticed one of the inspectors, the one with the scanner, taking photos of his manifest with a personal phone. It was subtle, a quick movement partially concealed by a clipboard, but Miguel's trained eye caught it. A cold feeling settled in his stomach as he started the engine. 2 hours later, Miguel pulled into a small gas station just before the turnoff to Highway 16. He needed fuel, but more importantly, he needed information. The station was a known stop for truckers remote enough to be overlooked by casual travelers, but positioned at a crucial junction for those who knew the back routes. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of beef jerky and floor cleaner. The cashier, an elderly Navajo man named Thomas, who had run the place for as long as Miguel could remember, nodded in recognition. "Usual diesel?" Thomas asked, already ringing up the transaction. "And coffee," Miguel added, glancing around the empty store. "Quiet today," Thomas grunted. "Been quiet all week. Not many regulars coming through." Miguel leaned against the counter, keeping his voice casual. "Jack Reeves usually stop here on his last run?" The old man's eyes sharpened. Day before he disappeared, had company following him. Black SUV kept its distance but stayed on his tail when he left. Miguel felt his muscles tense. "You report it?" "To who?" "Sheriff's 2 hours away on a good day." Thomas pushed Miguel's receipt across the counter. "Called his company when I heard, but by then ... He shrugged, the gesture conveying the futility of of after-the-fact precautions. As Miguel turned to leave, Thomas added, "There's another trucker in back. Says he knows you." In the small dining area attached to the store, Miguel found Ray Donovan hunched over a cup of coffee. Ray was an Army veteran turned trucker, a man whose graying beard and weathered face concealed a sharp mind that had served 2 tours in Afghanistan. "Didn't expect to see you here," Miguel said. Sliding into the booth across from him, Ray looked up, his bloodshot eyes suggesting he hadn't slept much recently. "Was hoping I would. Tried calling, but couldn't get through. Reception's spotty." "Out here? What's up?" Ray glanced toward the door before speaking. "Something's happening on 16. Third rig disappeared yesterday, Pete Sandoval. Good driver, careful. Not the type to make mistakes." Miguel's coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. "Pete's gone too? Cargo and all. But here's the thing. His emergency beacon went off for exactly 10 seconds about 40 miles east of here. Then nothing. I was close enough to check it out." Ray's voice dropped lower. "Found traces of a struggle. Blood. But the weird part? Tire tracks showed his rig was driven off, not towed. Someone's taking drivers and using their own trucks." The information aligned with what Dave had told him at the diner, but hearing it from Ray made it more immediate, more threatening. "You tell the authorities?" "Called it in. Sheriff sent a deputy who took some notes and left. Said they'd look into it." Ray's tone made clear what he thought of that promise. "Miguel, these aren't random hijackings. They're targeted. Pete was carrying medical equipment, same as Jack was. Same as you are now." Miguel felt the weight of the observation settle on him. "You think they're tracking specific cargo? Or specific drivers? Pete mentioned something at our last stop. Said he got pulled into secondary inspection at the border checkpoint. Unusual. Scanning equipment. Sound familiar?" Miguel's mind flashed to the inspector photographing his manifest. "Yeah. Happened to me today?" Ray nodded grimly. "They're marking targets. Question is, who? Corrupt officials selling information to the cartel? Or something else?" Miguel considered his options. He could turn around, take a different route longer, but potentially safer. He could call for an escort, though that would mean hours of delay, waiting for someone who might not come. Or he could continue as planned, knowing what might be waiting. "I've got time-sensitive medicine for St. Luke's," Miguel said finally. "Kids who need it today, not tomorrow." Ray's expression softened with understanding. "Figured you'd say that. Just watch your back. And here." He slid a small object across the table, a satellite tracker, military grade. Old habit from convoy days. "Activate it if you get in trouble. I'll be monitoring." Miguel pocketed the device, the small weight of it reassuring against his leg. "Appreciate." Outside, as he refueled La Reina, Miguel scanned the horizon, the empty desert stretching in all directions. The warning signs were clear. The unusual inspection, the photography of his manifest, the pattern of disappearances targeting similar cargo. His instincts honed through years of military service and long-haul driving were screaming danger. Yet as he climbed back into the cab and started the engine, Miguel knew he would continue. The supplies he carried weren't just boxes of medicine. They represented promises to people he would never meet, children whose lives might depend on timely delivery. He had made a commitment, not just as a driver, but as the man he had chosen to be. Highway 16 stretched before him, a narrow ribbon cutting through desolate terrain. Miguel pulled out his phone and sent a text to Maria. "On schedule. Love you all." Then he tucked the phone away, knowing that soon he would be out of range. As he turned onto the highway, Miguel noticed a vehicle pull out from a side road some distance behind him, a dark SUV, its windows tinted, maintaining a steady pace. He adjusted his mirrors to keep it in view, his right hand dropping briefly to confirm the Beretta was still secure under his seat. Just another day on the road, he told himself. But even as he thought it, Miguel began mentally preparing for what might come, cataloging resources, planning contingencies, shifting from Miguel, the trucker, to the Marine he had once been, the man who knew how to survive when survival seemed impossible. Now, as Miguel found himself forced to the shoulder of Highway 16, those earlier warnings crystallized into imminent threat. The two black SUVs had materialized seemingly from nowhere, executing a textbook intercept maneuver that left him no choice but to comply or risk a collision. As his truck came to a full stop on the gravel, dust swirling around the cab, Miguel took a deep breath and assessed his situation with the cold precision of his military training. 4 men emerged from the vehicles, 2 from each SUV. All wore tactical vests over plain clothes, moved with military discipline, and carried sidearms visible at their hips. Not local bandits or opportunistic criminals, but professionals. The kind who left no witnesses. The apparent leader approached Miguel's door, one hand resting casually on his holstered weapon. He wore mirrored sunglasses despite the fading light, his face a study in controlled authority. "Step out of the vehicle," he instructed in accented English, his tone suggesting this was a routine traffic stop rather than a hijacking. Miguel complied, moving slowly, keeping his hands visible. As his boots hit the gravel, he subtly pressed the satellite tracker in his pocket. Activating the emergency signal Ray would be monitoring. A small insurance policy, but likely too distant to matter in the immediate future. "Is there a problem, officer?" Miguel asked, adopting the confused demeanor of an ordinary trucker, even as he cataloged each man's position, weapons, and the distance to potential cover. The leader smiled thinly. "We're not police, Mr. Hernandez, but we do have an interest in your cargo." The use of his name confirmed what Miguel had suspected. This was targeted, not random. The leader gestured toward the rear of the truck. "Open the trailer." "I'm carrying medical supplies," Miguel said, moving toward the back of the trailer with measured steps. "Time-sensitive deliveries for hospitals in El Paso." "We know exactly what you're carrying," the leader replied, following a few paces behind. "That's why we're here." As they reached the rear doors, Miguel noticed the other men had taken positions surrounding the truck, one near the cab, one at the front of the trailer, and another hanging back by the SUVs, maintaining a broader watch. Coordinated, professional, leaving no blind spots. These weren't ordinary cartel foot soldiers. Miguel unlocked the trailer doors, swinging them open, to reveal pallets of sealed medical containers. The leader gestured for him to step aside as 2 of the men climbed inside, beginning a methodical inspection of the cargo. "You understand this is a controlled pharmaceutical delivery," Miguel said, working to keep his voice concerned but not confrontational. "Interfering with it is a federal offense." The leader removed his sunglasses, revealing eyes that assessed Miguel with calculated interest. "My name is Javier," he said, ignoring Miguel's comment. "And you've transported through our territory." 17 times now, Mr. Hernandez. We've been watching." Miguel let genuine confusion show on his face. "Your territory? This is a U.S. highway." Javier smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "Borders are more flexible than maps suggest, especially out here." He gestured at the empty desert surrounding them. "No cell service, no witnesses, no help coming." "But you already knew that, didn't you? It's why you carry this." He held up a phone displaying a photo of Miguel's Beretta, still hidden beneath the driver's seat. The implication was clear. They had already searched the cab while he was distracted at the rear. "A lot of drivers carry protection," Miguel said with a shrug. "Nothing unusual about that. Perhaps. But most drivers aren't former Marine Staff Sergeant Miguel Hernandez." decorated combat veteran with specialized training in counterinsurgency operations. Javier's voice remained conversational, but his eyes had hardened. Most truckers don't have your particular skill set. The revelation landed like a physical blow. They hadn't just tracked his cargo, they had researched him personally, dug into his military background. This wasn't a random hijacking. It was something more deliberate. That was a long time ago, Miguel said carefully. I'm just a delivery driver now. One of the men emerged from the trailer and whispered something to Javier, who nodded. Interesting. A manifest we received showed certain medications that aren't present. Instead, you appear to be carrying a much more valuable pharmaceutical inventory. Miguel frowned, genuine confusion replacing his calculated facade. That's impossible. I verified the cargo myself at pickup. Someone has been playing games, Javier said, his eyes narrowing. The question is whether it was you or someone else. Before Miguel could respond, the man who had been watching the perimeter approached rapidly, speaking in rapid Spanish. Miguel, caught enough to understand they had detected another vehicle approaching from the east unexpected company on this desolate stretch of road. Javier made a quick decision. Secure him. We're taking the truck. Two men moved toward Miguel, one drawing plastic zip ties from a pocket. Years of instinct nearly triggered a reflexive defense, but Miguel forced himself to remain passive. Not yet. The odds were too poor. A situation too uncertain. He needed more information, more leverage, or a better opportunity. As his hands were bound behind his back, Miguel was marched toward the lead SUV. What about the other driver? He asked, stalling for time. Emilio will handle it, Javier replied dismissively. A local sheriff, perhaps, or another trucker. Either way, a simple problem. Miguel watched as one of the men, Emilio, apparently positioned himself behind a rock formation near the road, rifle in hand. The approaching vehicle would have no warning before entering the ambush zone. You're making a mistake, Miguel said, keeping his voice steady. Whatever you think I'm carrying, it's not worth the attention this will bring. Javier studied him. Curiously, you misunderstand the situation, Mr. Hernandez. We're not common thieves. We're businessmen with specific requirements. Your cargo is valuable, yes, but you double quotes, he smiled coldly. You might be even more valuable. The sound of an approaching engine grew louder. Miguel was roughly pushed into the back seat of the SUV. A guard sliding in beside him with a pistol held casually, but unmistakably pointed in his direction. Through the windshield, Miguel could see the dust cloud of the approaching vehicle, still too distant to identify. You said businessmen, Miguel remarked, his mind racing through possibilities and contingencies. What business requires ambushing truckers on empty highways? Transportation, Javier replied, climbing into the front passenger seat. We have products that need moving across certain borders. Your truck is ideal legitimate paperwork, no route history, trusted driver credentials. The cargo we're taking today is merely a bonus. The pieces clicked together in Miguel's mind. You're not just stealing the truck. You want me to drive for you. Javier turned in his seat, regarding Miguel with something like professional appreciation. Smart man. Yes, we have several border crossings planned. A driver with your experience and clean record would be invaluable. Of course, appropriate motivation would be provided. He held up a phone displaying a photo of Miguel's house Maria, visible through the kitchen window, Carlos playing in the yard. Cold rage flooded Miguel's system, but he kept his expression neutral through sheer force of will. Those pharmaceuticals are needed at hospitals. Children are waiting for them. A noble concern, Javier said, his tone suggesting it was anything but. Perhaps we can arrange delivery after our business is concluded. Your cooperation would certainly help ensure that. The distant vehicle was growing closer. now recognizable as a sheriff's department SUV likely responding to a call, or simply on routine patrol. Miguel watched as Emilio adjusted his position, taking aim from behind cover. "That's a county sheriff," Miguel said quietly. "Killing a law enforcement officer will bring a response you can't imagine." Javier considered this, then spoke into a radio in rapid Spanish. Emilio lowered his rifle slightly, adjusting his aim. The message was clear: a non-lethal approach was preferred, but the sheriff would not be allowed to interfere. Miguel's mind raced through options. If the sheriff stopped, it would be a confrontation, one that would likely end badly for the officer. If Miguel attempted to warn him, he would be killed immediately, and the officer would still be ambushed. Neither scenario improved his position or increased his chances of survival, but there was a third option. "I'll cooperate," Miguel said suddenly. "No need for more complications." Javier raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the rapid capitulation. "A wise decision. On one condition," Miguel continued. "The sheriff drives by without incident, and you guarantee my family's safety. I'll drive whatever you want, wherever you want." "Your concern for the officer is touching," Javier remarked dryly. "My concern is practical," Miguel countered. "A dead sheriff means a manhunt. That complicates your business operations significantly." Javier studied him for a moment and nodded slowly. "Reasonable. Emilio will stand down unless the sheriff stops. If he continues past, we proceed as discussed." The sheriff's vehicle was now close enough that the light bar on top was clearly visible. Miguel held his breath as it approached, silently willing the officer to continue driving. The seconds stretched painfully as the patrol car maintained its speed, dust billowing behind it as it passed the trucks without slowing. Miguel exhaled slowly as the sheriff's taillights receded into the distance. A temporary reprieve, but it meant one less immediate threat to manage. "See? Cooperation makes everything simpler," Javier said, turning back to face forward. He spoke into the radio again, issuing instructions. Two of the men began transferring items from the SUVs to Miguel's truck cab, while another climbed into the driver's seat of La Reina. "My truck requires specific handling," Miguel said, the first seeds of a plan forming in his mind. "The transmission has a quirk that will leave you stranded if you don't know how to work it." Javier regarded him skeptically. A convenient claim. "Check for yourself. Try to shift from third to fourth, without double clutching, and feel what happens." After a moment's consideration, Javier instructed his man to test Miguel's claim. The driver attempted to navigate La Reina forward, and within moments, a grinding sound of a protesting transmission echoed across the desert. "Stop before you destroy it," Miguel called out. "That transmission is custom rebuilt. I'm the only one who can drive it efficiently." It was a calculated risk. The transmission had no such quirk, but Miguel was counting on these men being unfamiliar with the specific model of his truck. The ruse worked. Javier signaled for the driver to shut down the engine. "It seems you're even more valuable than anticipated," Javier said, his tone somewhere between annoyance and admiration. "But don't mistake necessity for trust, Mr. Hernandez. You will drive, but under very specific conditions." Miguel was removed from the SUV and marched to his truck. As he climbed into the familiar cab, he noticed several changes. A man he hadn't seen before, smaller than the others, with the intense focus of a technician, was installing something beneath the dashboard. A tracking device, most likely, and possibly a remote kill switch for the engine. "This is Rafael," Javier explained, following Miguel's gaze. "He ensures our assets remain under our control. Any deviation from the route we specify, any attempt to signal for help, and your truck will become inoperable. Additionally, ... He held up a small device that looked like a modified phone. "This will maintain contact with our associates near You are home in Tucson. Your family's continued well-being depends entirely on your cooperation." Miguel nodded, the rage he felt carefully contained behind a mask of resignation. "Where are we going?" "For now, east to a secure location. You'll receive further instructions there." Javier motioned to Emilio, who climbed into the passenger seat beside Miguel, weapon resting casually on his lap. "Emilio will ride with you. The rest of us will follow." As Miguel started the engine, his mind was already calculating angles and opportunities. The satellite tracker Ray had given him was still active in his pocket, but likely too far from anyone who could help immediately. His Beretta had been discovered and removed. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and his family was now leverage against him, but he still had advantages these men couldn't know about. 23 years of driving these roads had given him an intimate knowledge of the terrain that no GPS could match. His military training included not just combat tactics, but survival, skills, and psychological warfare. Most importantly, these men had made a critical miscalculation. They believed they had broken him with a threat to his family, when in reality they had only ensured that Miguel would stop at nothing to neutralize the threat they represented. As La Reina's engine rumbled to life, Miguel eased the truck back onto the highway, seemingly compliant. Beside him, Emilio relaxed slightly, interpreting Miguel's cooperation as submission. Behind them, the two SUVs fell into formation, maintaining a careful distance. "How long have you been watching me?" Miguel asked conversationally, testing the waters. Emilio glanced at him, suspicion evident in his expression. "Long enough? Drive." Miguel nodded, focusing on the road ahead. The desert landscape stretched endlessly, the sun beginning its descent toward the horizon. In a few hours, darkness would fall, bringing both challenges and opportunities. Until then, Miguel would play the defeated captive, observing his captors, identifying weaknesses, and waiting for the right moment. One thing was certain: these men had made a grave error in threatening his family. They had expected to find an ordinary trucker, perhaps with some outdated military training. Instead, they had awakened something Miguel had kept carefully dormant for decades: the calculated, methodical warrior who had once specialized in surviving impossible situations and turning the tables on those who underestimated him. As the miles accumulated beneath La Reina's wheels, Miguel began formulating a plan. It would require patience, precision, and perfect timing. But first, he needed to understand exactly what he was dealing with, who these men were, what they ultimately wanted, and most importantly, how to ensure his family remained safe when he made his move. "So," Miguel said casually, "how many drivers before me didn't cooperate?" Darkness had fallen by the time they reached what Javier called the processing facility, an abandoned mining outpost tucked into a canyon, invisible from the main road. Miguel guided La Reina through a narrow access road, following Javier's directions until they entered a large clearing dominated by a cluster of corrugated metal buildings. Two other semi-trucks were already parked in the shadows, their trailers open and empty. Miguel recognized one immediately. It belonged to Jack Reeves. "Park next to the warehouse," Javier instructed from the radio, clipped to Emilio's vest. Miguel complied, easing La Reina into position before shutting down the engine. As silence fell over the cab, Emilio gestured with his weapon toward the door. Out, the compound was eerily quiet, the only sound being the cooling tick of La Reina's engine and the soft crunch of boots on gravel. Armed men patrolled the perimeter, their silhouettes barely visible against the star-filled sky. Miguel counted at least 6 new faces beyond the original group that had intercepted him, a significant operation, far more organized than typical cartel activity in the region. Javier approached, now flanked by a tall, broad-shouldered man whose bearing suggested military experience. "Welcome to your new workplace, Mr. Hernandez," This is Colonel Vega, my associate. Vega's eyes assessed Miguel with cold precision. He doesn't look special, he remarked in accented English. Appearances can be deceiving, Javier replied. His record suggests otherwise. Miguel remained silent, absorbing details about the facility entry points, guard positions, potential weaknesses in security. His gaze lingered momentarily on Jack's truck, searching for any sign of his fellow driver. Your colleague is no longer with us, Vega said, noticing Miguel's interest. He proved uncooperative. Miguel kept his expression neutral, despite the implication. I'm cooperating. For now, Vega acknowledged. Come, you should understand your new responsibilities. They led him to one of the buildings, a former office structure converted into a makeshift command center. Inside, maps covered the walls, marking routes across the border and through checkpoints. On a central table, stacks of documentation lay beside sophisticated communications equipment. Impressive operation, Miguel commented, scanning the room. Military grade. Some of us had proper training before entering private enterprise, Vega said with the faintest hint of pride. Unlike the common criminals you might associate with our business. Miguel noted the distinction. These men considered themselves professionals, elites. A potential weakness he could exploit. And what exactly is your business? Javier gestured to the maps. Transportation logistics, as I mentioned, but on a scale perhaps larger than you imagined. Miguel studied the marked routes, quickly recognizing a sophisticated network designed to move cargo, presumably drugs, through seemingly legitimate channels. His truck route was highlighted, along with several others. You're building a smuggling fleet, Miguel observed. Legitimate trucks, established routes, clean drivers. The business evolves, Javier confirmed. Random hijackings and desperate. Mules crossing the desert are inefficient. We require infrastructure. Vega stepped forward. Your role is simple. You will make 3 deliveries for us, using your established credentials and route permissions. The cargo will be concealed within legitimate medical shipments, undetectable to standard inspections. And after these 3 deliveries? Miguel asked, already knowing the answer. Vega's smile was cold. Let's focus on your immediate future. A subordinate entered, whispering something to Javier, who nodded. Bring in the motivation package. Moments later, another man entered carrying a laptop. He set it on the table and opened it to reveal a live video feed Miguel's house in Tucson, viewed from across the street. The timestamp showed it was current. Maria moved past a window, visible for a brief moment before disappearing from frame. As you can see, your family is currently under observation, Javier explained. They are unaware, of course, and will remain so as long as you fulfill your obligations. Miguel stared at the screen, a wave of cold fury washing through him. The image of his home, his sanctuary, under surveillance by these men crossed a line that transformed his calculated planning into something more primal, but he kept his expression carefully neutral, showing only resignation. I understand, he said quietly. Good. You'll begin your first delivery tomorrow morning. Until then, you'll be secured in one of our holding areas. Javier nodded to Emilio, who gestured toward the door with his weapon nod, as they led Miguel across the compound toward a small outbuilding that had been converted into a makeshift cell. He maintained his compliant demeanor while continuing to catalog. Details: guard rotations, security cameras, the location of vehicles and weapons. The more he observed, the more he confirmed his initial assessment. This was no ordinary cartel operation, but something more sophisticated, with military discipline. An organization. The cell was sparse: a metal cot, a bucket in the corner, a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling. Emilio shoved him inside, securing the door with both a padlock and an electronic keypad. "Someone will bring food soon," Emilio said through the small barred window. "Try to rest. You'll need it." As the sound of Emilio's footsteps faded, Miguel sat on the edge of the cot, his mind working through scenarios and contingencies. The situation was dire. He was outnumbered, unarmed, and his family's safety hung in the balance. Yet something didn't add up. The scale of this operation, the level of resources devoted to securing drivers like him, suggested something beyond typical drug smuggling. The door opened abruptly, and a young man entered, carrying a tray with a bottle of water and a sandwich. Unlike the others, he wore no tactical gear, and his movements lacked military precision. "Dinner," he announced, setting the tray on the floor dot. As he straightened, Miguel noticed something odd, a bruise on the young man's wrist, partially hidden by his sleeve. The pattern was distinctive, finger marks from being restrained. "Thank you," Miguel said carefully. "Have you been working here long?" The young man's eyes darted nervously to the door. "Not supposed to talk to you." "Of course, I understand." Miguel nodded, projecting calm reassurance. "Just wondering if you've seen my friend Jack, another driver." A flash of recognition crossed the young man's face before he could mask it. "Don't know any Jack." "My mistake," Miguel said easily. "Thanks for the food." After the young man left, Miguel examined the meal, confirming his suspicion. The bread was stale, the meat of poor quality. Not the kind of provisions professionals would stock. He ate anyway, needing to maintain his strength. As night deepened, Miguel lay on the cot, appearing to sleep while his mind continued processing everything he had observed. The young man with the bruised wrist, the sophisticated operation with substandard provisions, the emphasis on clean drivers for multiple cross-border runs, the military equipment and personnel mixed with apparent civilians. The pieces began to form a pattern that chilled him more than the desert. Night air seeping through the thin walls of his cell. This wasn't just about drugs. The scale, the resources, the specific interest in his background, it pointed to something more sinister. From his cot, Miguel could see a sliver of the compound through the small window. In the distance, he observed Rafael, the technician, working inside his truck's cab, installing additional equipment. Beside La Reina, men were unloading crates from one of the SUVs long, narrow containers handled with extreme care. In that moment, as he watched them work, under the harsh glare of floodlights, something inside Miguel shifted. The calculated, patient approach he had been maintaining gave way to a cold certainty. He would not be making any deliveries for these men. Whatever they were planning went far beyond drug smuggling, and he would not be their instrument. The family photo he had kept on his dashboard, his anchor, his reminder of everything that mattered, was gone, taken or destroyed during the hijacking. But Miguel didn't need the physical reminder anymore. The image was burned into his consciousness, fueling a resolve that transcended mere survival. These men had made a fundamental error in their calculations. They had studied his military record, researched his driving history, and tracked his movements with precision. But they had failed to understand the most crucial element. What happens when a man who has spent decades suppressing his capacity for violence is given no choice but to embrace it once again? As the night grew deeper, Miguel closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to prepare. Tomorrow, they expected him to begin working for them. Instead, he would show them exactly why threatening. His family had been their final mistake. Dawn broke with the harsh clarity particular to the desert, the first rays of sunlight slicing through the small window of Miguel's cell. He had not slept. Instead, he had spent the night in a state of focused meditation, a technique he had learned during his military days to rest his body while keeping his mind sharp. As footsteps approached his door, Miguel arranged himself on the cot, projecting the defeated weariness his captors would expect to see. The electronic lock beeped, and Emilio entered, flanked by another guard Miguel hadn't seen before, younger, less experienced, judging by how his hand hovered nervously near his holstered weapon. "On your feet," Emilio ordered. "Time to work." Miguel complied slowly, allowing a wince of discomfort to cross his face as he stood. "Need to use the bathroom first." Emilio nodded curtly. "Make it quick. Colonel Vega doesn't like delays." They escorted him to a small outbuilding serving as communal facilities for the compound. Inside, Miguel took his time washing his face and hands, using the moments of relative privacy to center himself and make final mental preparations. The mirror above the sink was cracked, offering a fragmented reflection of his face, stubbled, weary, but with eyes that had shed all hesitation. When he emerged, a third guard had joined the escort detail. This one Miguel recognized from the previous day, one of the original team that had hijacked him on the highway. The added security suggested they still harbored concerns about his compliance, despite his apparent cooperation. Good. They should be concerned. They led him across the compound to where La Reina waited, her chrome surfaces gleaming in the morning light. Rafael, the technician, stood beside the driver's door, making final adjustments to whatever monitoring systems they had installed. "Everything is prepared," Rafael reported as they approached. "The tracking system is active, and the remote kill switch has been tested. He cannot deviate from the programmed route without our knowledge." Javier emerged from the command building, followed by Colonel Vega and 2 more armed guards. The increased security wasn't subtle, a clear reminder of the consequences of any attempted resistance. "Mr. Hernandez," Vega greeted him with cold formality. "I trust you slept well and have had time to consider your situation clearly." "Crystal clear," Miguel replied evenly. "Excellent. Today's operation is straightforward. You will drive your regular route to El Paso, deliver the legitimate medical supplies as scheduled, and return here. This first run is a test of both our systems and your cooperation." Miguel nodded. "What about my family?" Javier held up a tablet, displaying the same video feed from the previous night, Miguel's house, now in morning light. Carlos was visible in the front yard, waiting for his school bus. "They remain under observation," Javier said. "Complete this delivery successfully, and we move to the next phase. Any deviation... He let the implication hang in the air. "I understand," Miguel said, his eyes lingering on the image of his son. "No deviations." Vega gestured toward the truck. "Rafael will accompany you on this journey. Consider him both technical support and insurance against any misunderstandings." This was unexpected. Miguel had assumed Emilio, or one of the other armed guards, would be his passenger. Rafael was smaller, less physically imposing, and presumably less experienced in combat situations. A potential advantage, but also a complication for the plan that had been forming in his mind. "Let's get moving," Miguel said, climbing into the familiar cab of his truck. "Hospitals are waiting for those supplies." Rafael took the passenger seat, placing a laptop on his knees and connecting it to a port they had installed beneath the dashboard. "The system will track our position continuously," he explained, his accent thicker than the others. "Any unauthorized stops or route changes will trigger an alert and disable the engine." Miguel started the engine. The rumble of La Reina's powerful diesel, a comforting familiarity in the midst of chaos. As he eased the truck toward the compound exit, Javier approached his window one last time. "Remember," he said quietly, "we are professionals. This operation has been planned for months. There are contingencies for every scenario, including any heroics you might be contemplating." Miguel met his gaze steadily. "I'm just a driver doing his job." Javier studied him for a moment longer, then stepped back with a satisfied nod. The gates swung open, and Miguel guided La Reina onto the access road that would eventually connect with Highway 16. For the first hour, Miguel drove in silence, occasionally glancing at Raphael, who remained focused on his laptop, monitoring their progress against the prescribed route. The technician seemed uncomfortable with the silence, fidgeting in his seat and repeatedly checking the communications device clipped to his belt. "First time on a long haul?" Miguel asked casually. Raphael hesitated before answering. "First time in America." "Where are you from?" "It doesn't matter," Raphael replied, but his tone lacked the harshness of the others. "Just drive." Miguel nodded, returning his attention to the road. The sun climbed higher, baking the asphalt until heat mirages danced on the horizon. In his mind, Miguel was mapping every mile, every landmark, calculating distances and timing with military precision. "The others," Miguel said after another long stretch of silence, "they're former military, aren't they? Colombian Special Forces, maybe?" Raphael glanced at him sharply. "You asked many questions. Just making conversation. 23 years driving these roads, silence gets old." After a moment, Raphael relaxed slightly. "Some are military. Some are not. The colonel, he was Special Forces, yes." "And you?" Miguel asked. "You don't seem like the rest of them." "I am a technician," Raphael said with a hint of pride. "They need my skills." "Must be important work," Miguel observed. "All this security, the planning. Not typical for regular drug runs." Raphael's expression closed immediately. "I don't know what cargo they transport. I only maintain systems." But the reaction told Miguel something valuable. Raphael wasn't fully briefed on the operation. A compartmentalized cell structure, typical of sophisticated criminal or terrorist organizations. Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. They reached the highway junction where Miguel would normally turn east toward El Paso. As he made the turn, Raphael checked his GPS and nodded in approval. "We are on schedule." "Always am," Miguel replied. "That's why my clients trust me." He paused, then added, "That's the difference between professionals and criminals. Trust." Raphael shot him a curious look, but said nothing. "Take you and me," Miguel continued conversationally. "You're trusted with technical systems, but not with operational details. I'm trusted to drive, but kept under surveillance. Tells you something about the people running the show, doesn't it?" "You tried to manipulate me," Raphael said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. Miguel shrugged. "Just an observation from someone who served in an organization where trust was essential, where we didn't leave our people behind." The words hung in the air between them as La Reina's engine growled steadily, eating up the miles toward El Paso. Miguel fell silent again, giving Raphael space to consider his words while he continued refining his plan. The first unexpected development came 2 hours into the journey, when Raphael's communication device buzzed. The technician listened intently, his expression growing increasingly concerned. "Problem?" Miguel asked. Raphael hesitated, clearly weighing operational security against the need to share relevant information. "Change of plans. We must take alternate route. Turn north at next junction." "That adds at least 2 hours," Miguel pointed out. "The medical supplies, not your concern," Raphael cut him off. "New coordinates are being uploaded to the system now." Miguel watched as the GPS display on Raphael's laptop updated, showing a new route that would take them deep into the mountains, away from populated areas and regular patrol routes. The change was significant and revealing. Something had spooked their operation enough to abandon the carefully planned route. "Your friends seem nervous," Miguel observed. Raphael didn't respond, but his tense posture confirmed Miguel's assessment. The change presented both challenges and opportunities. The mountain routes would be more isolated, with fewer potential witnesses or sources of assistance. But they would also be more difficult to navigate, with narrow roads and blind corners. That could be turned to advantage by someone who knew how to use the terrain. As they approached the turnoff, Miguel made his first calculated move. "Need to stop for fuel before we hit the mountains," he said, nodding toward the gauge. "Not enough to make it through on the new route." Raphael checked the fuel indicator, which Miguel had deliberately kept below half tank since their departure. "How far to next station?" "There's one just ahead." 5 minutes, in and out. After a moment's hesitation, Raphael nodded. "Quick stop only. I will monitor." Miguel pulled into a small service station and sat alone at the crossroads, positioning La Reina next to the diesel pump furthest from the store. As he shut down the engine, he noted the near-empty parking lot, only one other vehicle present, an old pickup truck with a missing tailgate. "I need to authorize the pump and use the restroom," Miguel said, reaching for the door handle. "I come with you," Raphael insisted, closing his laptop. "Suit yourself." Inside the small convenience store, a bored attendant barely looked up from his magazine as Miguel paid for the fuel. Raphael hovered close by, one hand inside his jacket, where a weapon was undoubtedly concealed. "Restroom?" Miguel asked the attendant. "Around back," the man replied, returning to his magazine dot as they exited the store. Miguel led the way around the building, every sense hyper-alert. The restroom was a single unit with an exterior entrance isolated, out of sight from both the store and the fuel pumps. "Perfect. I'll wait here," Raphael said. Positioning himself beside the door, Doc Miguel entered the small, grimy bathroom, immediately assessing it for what he needed. A narrow window above the toilet too small for escape, but not his target. A paper towel dispenser, partially empty. A trash can overflowing with discarded towels. And most importantly, an ancient fire alarm pole station mounted on the wall, a relic from when the building had been part of a larger structure working quickly. Miguel crumpled several paper towels into a tight ball and held them beneath the faucet until thoroughly soaked. Then he moved to the fire alarm, evaluating it with the eyes of someone who had once been trained in creating diversions under hostile conditions. The device was old, but likely still functional, connected to a simple circuit that would trigger when the handle was pulled. Miguel pressed the wet paper towels against the base of the unit, packing them carefully around the wiring. When activated, the moisture would create a short circuit, hopefully causing a momentary electrical surge before failing. Taking a deep breath, Miguel flushed the toilet as cover noise and yanked down hard on the fire alarm handle. The resulting spark was immediate, a sharp crack, followed by a brief, shrill alarm that cut off abruptly as the circuit failed, exactly as he had hoped. "What happened?" Raphael called from outside, alarm evident in his voice. Miguel threw open the door, his expression convincingly startled. "Something electrical shorted out. Damn thing nearly electrocuted me." Raphael's hand moved to his communication device, but before he could activate it, the convenience store attendant rounded the corner. "What the hell did you do?" the attendant demanded. "That system's connected to the main power. You just blew the breaker for the whole building." The perfect distraction. As Raphael turned to address the angry attendant, Miguel made his move. 2 quick steps brought him within striking distance, and decades of training took over. His right hand clamped over Raphael's mouth, while his left arm locked around the technician's throat in a precise chokehold, cutting off blood flow to the brain without blocking the airway. The attendant froze, eyes widening as he registered what was happening. "Back inside," Miguel ordered quietly. "Lock the door, stay down. Call 911 in exactly 15 minutes, not before. Tell them armed hostiles are operating in the area." The man stared for a moment longer, then turned and ran, disappearing around the corner without argument. Raphael struggled briefly, but Miguel maintained the hold with practiced precision. Within seconds, the technician went limp, unconscious but unharmed. Miguel lowered him carefully to the ground, then quickly searched him, retrieving a pistol, communication device, and a set of keys. Moving quickly back to La Reina, Miguel climbed into the cab and started the engine. What he was about to do went against every safety protocol, every regulation he had followed in 23 years of professional driving. But these weren't normal circumstances, and La Reina was about to serve a purpose her manufacturers had never intended. Miguel disengaged the air brakes, put the transmission in gear, and aimed the 18-wheeler directly at the exposed flank of the cartel position. Then he pressed the accelerator to the floor. 80,000 pounds of steel and momentum, descending the hillside with gathering speed. The cartel forces, focused on the gunfire from their front, didn't notice the truck bearing down on them. From the side, until it was too late, Miguel waited until the last possible moment before throwing open the door and rolling clear of the cab, hitting the ground hard and tumbling into the cover of a drainage ditch as La Reina continued her unstoppable charge. The impact was catastrophic. The truck plowed into the tactical van and one of the SUVs, crushing them against the concrete barriers of the highway with a sound like the end of the world. Fuel tanks ruptured, electrical systems shorted, and secondary explosions bloomed in. A chain reaction that transformed the neat cartel formation into a scene of absolute chaos. In the confusion that followed, Miguel moved with single-minded purpose, using the smoke and debris as cover as he circled around to approach Javier's position from behind. The cartel leader had survived the initial devastation, taking cover behind the remaining SUV while shouting into his radio for reinforcements. Protocol Sierra is compromised, Javier was saying, his voice tight with controlled panic. Secure the primary asset immediately. Prepare for evacuation. Miguel closed the distance silently, years of combat training guiding his movements. 20 feet. 15. 10. Javier sensed his presence at the last moment, spinning around with his weapon raised. Too late. Miguel was already within striking distance, his hand closing around Javier's wrist, forcing the gun aside as his other fist drove into the man's solar plexus with crushing force. Javier gasped, dropping to his knees as Miguel disarmed him with practiced efficiency. In the background, the firefight continued, but it was clearly one-sided now. The law enforcement team had the superior position and firepower. The surveillance on my family, Miguel said, pressing the muzzle of Javier's own weapon against his temple. Call it off, now. Javier's eyes widened, fear finally breaking through his professional facade. You don't understand what you're doing, he gasped. This is bigger than you know. I understand exactly what I'm doing, Miguel replied, his voice deadly calm. Call it off. After a moment's hesitation, Javier reached for his satellite phone, moving slowly under Miguel's watchful eye. He dialed a number, then spoke rapidly in Spanish, canceling the surveillance operation, ordering his men to withdraw. It's done, he said, looking up at Miguel with a mixture of fear and resignation. But it won't matter. You've exposed yourself now. They'll find you, find your family. Who's they? Miguel demanded. Who are you really working for? Before Javier could answer, a bullet struck him in the chest, the impact throwing him backward onto the asphalt. Miguel dropped instantly, rolling behind the SUV as more shots followed. Through the smoke, Miguel glimpsed Colonel Vega moving in a controlled combat crouch, weapon raised. Not firing wildly, but taking careful, measured shots, eliminating Javier to prevent him from talking. Miguel returned fire, forcing Vega back into cover. The colonel was good military trained and combat experienced, but Miguel had surprise and superior position. The exchange lasted less than 20 seconds before Miguel's shot found its mark, catching Vega in the shoulder and spinning him to the ground. As Miguel approached cautiously, Vega laughed a harsh, pained sound. You think this ends here? He gasped, blood bubbling at his lips. "We are just one cell. The operation continues." "What operation?" Miguel demanded, kicking Viga's weapon away. "What are you transporting?" Viga's eyes gleamed with fanatical certainty. Despite his failing strength, "The future," he whispered. "A new world, cleansed by fire." Before Miguel could press further, the sound of approaching vehicles caught his attention. Not the cartel reinforcements, but heavy-duty tactical vehicles. Black SUVs with government plates and armored personnel carriers. The cavalry had arrived. In force dot, as agents in tactical gear swarmed the scene, Miguel raised his hand slowly, identifying himself. Ray emerged from the lead vehicle, rushing forward to verify Miguel's identity to the tactical team. "Jesus, Miguel," Ray said, looking around at the devastation. "When I said call if you got in trouble, this wasn't exactly what I had in mind." Miguel's focus remained on Vega, who was now being treated by a medic despite his critical condition. "This isn't a drug operation," he told Ray urgently. "They're moving weapons, something serious enough to warrant ex-Special Forces security." Ray's expression grew grim. "We know. Your emergency signal triggered a response that was already in the works. These guys have been on the radar for months, suspected of moving components for dirty bombs across the border." The world seemed to shift beneath Miguel's feet as the full implications hit home. Not just weapons of mass destruction. The scale of what he had stumbled into suddenly made the extreme measures they had taken make terrible sense. "My family," Miguel said, the fear he had been controlling rushing back in full force. "They had surveillance on my house." "Already handled," Ray assured him. "Team was dispatched to your address the moment your signal came in. Maria and the kids are safe under protection." As the adrenaline began to fade, exhaustion threatened to overwhelm Miguel. 24 hours of captivity, combat, and constant vigilance had pushed him to his physical limits. But one loose end remained. The compound, he told Ray. "There's more. They're other drivers, possibly hostages. And whatever they're transporting... Ray nodded grimly. "Strike team is already en route. Based on the intel you provided when you activated the tracker, they should be hitting it right about now." Miguel looked around at the smoldering wreckage of La Reina, his faithful truck, sacrificed in the line of duty. In the distance, sirens wailed as more law enforcement vehicles approached. The immediate danger had passed, but Miguel knew the wider threat remained. Men like Viga were soldiers in a larger cause, one that wouldn't end with this single operation. "I need to get to my family," Miguel said, the weight of the past 24 hours finally settling on his shoulders. Ray nodded, guiding him toward one of the tactical vehicles. "Let's go home, brother. You've done enough for one day." As they drove away from the scene, Miguel watched the desert landscape pass by in a blur, his mind already turning to what would come next: the debriefings, the investigations, the necessary security measures to protect his family in the aftermath. The simple life he had built over 23 years had been irrevocably changed, but he was going home. To Maria, to Lucia, to Carlos. And for now, that was enough. 3 weeks later, Miguel sat on the front porch of his Tucson home, watching the sun sink toward the western horizon. The wooden steps creaked as Maria emerged from the house, carrying 2 cups of coffee, a ritual unchanged despite everything that had happened. "Carlos is finally asleep," she said, settling beside him. "Third nightmare this week." Miguel nodded, accepting the coffee. The events on Highway 16 had left marks on all of them, visible and invisible. Carlos had become clingy and fearful, startling at unexpected sounds. Lucia had taken emergency leave from nursing school to stay close to home. And Maria moved through the house with a new wariness, checking locks and windows with compulsive regularity. The therapist said it will take time, Miguel replied. For all of us. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the neighborhood settle into evening routines that seemed miraculous in their ordinariness. Children being called in for dinner, sprinklers hissing on parched lawns, a dog barking at shadows. Life continuing, as though the world hadn't nearly changed forever. The debriefings had lasted days. Miguel had recounted every detail to an expanding circle of agencies, local police, FBI, Homeland Security, and finally, officials whose agencies weren't named, but whose authority was absolute. The full picture had emerged gradually. A sophisticated terrorist cell using cartel infrastructure to move components for radiological weapons across the border. The compound had yielded enough material for 3 dirty bombs along with evidence, linking the operation to international terror networks. 2 other drivers had been rescued from the compound, Jack Reeves among them, battered but alive. Pete Sandoval had not been so fortunate. His body had been discovered in a shallow grave behind the main building. Execution-style bullet, wound to the head marking his refusal to cooperate. Have you thought about what you're going to do? Maria asked, her question bringing Miguel back to the present. The question had been hovering between them since his return. Miguel's truck was gone, destroyed in the confrontation. His regular routes were compromised. After 23 years, the life he had built had been dismantled in a single day. The FBI agent called again, Miguel said. Offered a consultant. Position: training programs for drivers on recognizing security threats, identifying suspicious activities at border crossings. Maria's hand found his, fingers intertwining. And told him I'd think about it. Miguel sipped his coffee. Dave called too. Border Patrol is expanding their tactical unit, once experienced people. They hadn't discussed the full extent of what had happened on Highway 16. Maria hadn't asked, and Miguel hadn't volunteered the details of how he had neutralized the cartel forces. Some things remained in the space between them, acknowledged, but unspoken the recognition that the man who had returned to her was not quite the same as the one who had left 3 weeks ago. What do you want, Miguel? Maria asked, finally. The question hung in the twilight air, weighted with 2 decades of shared history. Miguel considered it carefully, his gaze drifting to the family photo now displayed on the small table between them, a replacement for the one lost during his captivity. Carlos's gap-toothed smile, Lucia's proud graduation pose, Maria's steady presence. I want this, he said simply. But I need to make sure it's safe, that what happened can't happen again. Maria nodded, understanding the unspoken burden he carried. The cartel cell had been neutralized, but the wider network remained. Vega had survived his wounds and was now in federal custody, but his fanatical certainty suggested others would continue their work. Whatever you decide, Maria said, we face it together. The sound of tires on pavement drew their attention as a vehicle pulled into the driveway, a black pickup truck Miguel recognized immediately. Ray Donovan stepped out, carrying a manila envelope and a 6-pack of beer. Evening, folks, Ray called, approaching the porch. Hope I'm not interrupting. Miguel stood to greet him with a firm handshake that conveyed more than words could. Without Ray's response to the emergency signal, the outcome would have been very different. Maria was just about to start dinner, Miguel said. You'll join. U.S.? Wouldn't miss it, Ray replied, handing the beer to Miguel and nodding respectfully to Maria, who smiled and went inside to set another place. Once she was gone, Ray's expression grew serious. Thought you'd want to know, he said, handing Miguel the envelope. They raided 3 more locations based on intel from the compound. Picked up most of the network, but some got away, including whoever was coordinating the whole operation. Miguel opened the envelope, scanning the documents inside classified briefing summaries, surveillance photos, threat assessments. They still think there are more shipments planned? Ray nodded grimly. Different routes, different methods, but same objective. They're adapting, recruiting new drivers. The weight of responsibility settled on Miguel's shoulders. What had happened to him could happen to others, ordinary people caught in extraordinary circumstances. Their lives and families threatened by forces they never knew existed. "I've been thinking about your offer," Miguel said, tucking the documents back into the envelope. "About joining the task force." "Doors still open," Ray confirmed. "We need people who understand both worlds, the trucking industry and the tactical response. People who can spot the signs before it's too late." From inside the house came the sound of Carlos's laughter, a rare and precious sound these days, as Lucia apparently told him something amusing. The normal, beautiful chaos of family life continued despite everything, resilient in its simplicity. "I can't go back to regular routes," Miguel acknowledged. "Not after what happened. But I need to keep this." He gestured toward his home. His family, separate from whatever comes next. Ray understood. "We can work with that. Training role initially, consulting on security protocols. Limited field operations. Nothing long-term." Miguel nodded slowly. It wasn't the life he had planned, but then life rarely followed the expected route. Sometimes you found yourself on unfamiliar roads, navigating by instinct and determination. Alone. "Dinner's ready," Maria called from inside, her voice carrying the warmth of normalcy that had seemed lost just weeks ago, as they moved toward the house. Ray paused, placing a hand on Miguel's shoulder. "For what it's worth, what you did out there, not many could have pulled it off. You saved a lot of lives." Miguel thought of La Reina, faithful companion for so many miles, sacrificed in that final desperate gambit. He thought of the other drivers, those saved and those lost. He thought of the unseen people who would never know how close they had come to catastrophe. "Just did what needed doing," he replied simply. Inside, the table was set. The routine of family dinner, a gentle defiance against the chaos they had endured. Carlos immediately launched into a story about school, his animation returning briefly as he described a science project. Lucia and Maria exchanged knowing glances, their relief at this glimpse of normalcy evident as Miguel took his place at the table, surrounded by the people who anchored him to the world. He felt the disparate pieces of himself settling into a new configuration, not the young Marine he had once been, not just the trucker he had become, but something forged in the crucible of Highway 16, someone who understood that ordinary lives sometimes intersected with extraordinary dangers, and that when they did, everything depended on the choices made in those critical moments. Tomorrow would bring decisions and plans, responsibilities and precautions. But tonight was for this, the simple miracle of being home, of coffee on the porch and dinner with family, of the quiet that comes after the storm has passed. Maria's hand found his beneath the table, a silent acknowledgment of all that had happened, and all that might still come. Miguel squeezed gently in response, a promise made without words, that whatever roads lay ahead, they would navigate them together. Outside, the desert night settled over Tucson, stars emerging in a sky that stretched endlessly from horizon to horizon. Somewhere out there, Highway 16 cut through the darkness, a ribbon of asphalt winding through landscapes both beautiful and dangerous. It would always be there, a reminder of how quickly the ordinary could transform into the extraordinary, of how thin the line sometimes was between the world we think we know and the one that exists in the shadows. But for now, in this moment of quiet after rain, Miguel Hernandez was simply a man at his dinner table, listening to his son's voice, feeling his wife's hand in his, watching his daughter smile, treasuring the ordinary miracle of a family intact despite everything that had tried to tear it apart.